Hello and welcome. The title of my talk is Knocking on Death's Door, Designing a New Bunker for Horizon Forbidden West. I'm Blake Rebouche, Principal Quest Designer at Guerrilla. I joined Guerrilla about 7 years ago during the production of Horizon Zero Dawn. On Zero Dawn, I was the designer principally responsible for the Grave Horde and the Zero Dawn project facility, featured in Deep Secrets of the Earth, if you know that quest. So my specialty is in big, narratively driven, mostly linear interior spaces. I've been a designer on Horizon Forbidden West through the entirety of the production process. I can honestly say that it's been one of the most amazing and challenging projects I've ever tackled as a designer. So what is this talk about? This talk is about a quest I worked on for the entirety of development of Horizon Forbidden West, and that quest is called Death's Door. Specifically, I'm going to talk about the level and the quest design of the bunker section of this quest, because there's a section that's over land that I'm not going to get into here. I designed 7 quests during the development of Horizon Forbidden West, but it's no lie to say that I probably spent more person hours working on this quest than several of the others combined, and indeed more than any other single piece of content in any game I've ever worked on. I want to give you all as broad a picture as I can of the development of this large and complex quest, and in doing so, also show you a bit of our quest design and level design process. Ideally, when you walk away from this talk, I want you to have some sense of how we build our quests and how we iterate on complex, linear, narratively designed levels. If you've seen my talk from GDC 2018, this is a bit of a follow-up talk. It's a bit of a sequel, but you don't need to have watched that talk to appreciate this one. In my previous talk, Balancing Action and RPG in Horizon Zero Dawn quests, I talked about my process and my learnings in the creation of the bunker, the Grave Horde. That was a space where Aloy came face to face with the realities of war in the time of the Old Ones. For Forbidden West, we wanted to build on some of the things we did well in Zero Dawn's bunkers. For instance, we wanted to focus on building story-rich environments with unique puzzles. We also wanted to de-emphasize some of the parts of the first game's bunkers that were problematic, in particular the combat against humans, and the large cost in terms of art and lighting that they represented. As you'll discover, we were sometimes more, sometimes less successful in respect to these goals. It took me 4 years and counting to build this quest. I've broken that timeline down into 6 phases, and I'm going to talk you through each one, giving you a sense of what the level looked like in each and the challenges we faced in each. In the beginning of the beginning, we'll talk about the we'll talk about the pre-production and paper prototyping phases. In Skeleton Quest, we'll talk about the block meshing of the level. In the first playable, we'll talk about getting the quest ready for first playtest. In iteration and parallel development, I'll talk about adding value through iteration and integrating the work of other teams. In A Time of Great Change, we'll talk a bit about the pandemic, work from home, and rework. And lastly, in Finishing Touches, we'll talk about polish. So let's start with the beginning of the beginning. This is the equivalent of pre-production on this quest, but it encompasses a bit of the overall project pre-production as well. During the pre-production of Horizon Forbidden West, the entire company gathered together in our canteen for a meeting we called Story Time with the narrative director. In this meeting, we were told the entire main story of Horizon Forbidden West in one go. Sometime after that, I was assigned to create a chunk of that story, a discrete part, and that's the quest that became Death's Door. As part of that assignment, I received a narrative summary of the quest. This is a document generated by the writer after a quest bitch has agreed to. With a main quest like this, there's already been lead and director level meetings where they discuss the high-level points of what happens in a quest, and so when I receive the narrative summary, it's already ready for me to go to start building it out. Starting from the narrative summary, I break down the steps of the quest to an early beat sheet or design document. During the process, I might add, change, or tweak the events spelled out in the narrative summary to add gameplay or clarify player goals with the approval from leads and direction. Once that early design beat sheet is approved, I start paper prototyping. This is a good time to mention that I'm going to try to keep this talk as spoiler light as I can, but let me try to give you some context. In this quest, Aloy goes into an old world bunker in search of a backup copy of Gaia, the AI designed to control the terraforming process of Earth. That's this bunker. As Aloy enters the central hallway, she finds a blockage caused by water and time that she'll need to get around to reach an inner gene-locked door. Nearby is an old communication room containing a puzzle to unlock a door. That's here. Past the locked door, there are stairs down a level to a flooded residential area that we swim through. That's this. At the end of that swimming section, she'll find a way that she can climb back up to level 1 and get to that inner gene lock door. Once she passes the inner gene lock door, she comes into an interior section we call the recluse chamber. But as we'll see, when she gets there, some bad dudes show up, they blow up the whole chamber, and she falls into another deeper section, an older section of the bunker. That is kind of like an old generator room, and there she must swim to escape the facility. Okay, with the paper design in hand, we're ready to go to the skeleton quest phase. But what is a skeleton quest? It's the simplest version of the playable version of a game where the player can walk between various locations on the map, and there are simple pop-up text windows that appear describing what happens. This helps give a sense of pacing and flow for quests that take place on the world map. A skeleton quest for a large interior like a bunker like this is often a bit more complicated because you need to do a full block mesh design of the interior of the bunker as well. With the skeleton quest in the overworld, you often have some natural features to work with or around, like a mountain or lakes or streams or forests or whatever. Without that, it's important to have some sense of the look of the bunker early. For that, we work with concept art. Here's an early piece of concept art suggesting the layers of construction of the bunker based on my paper designs. Notice that there are flooded floors here, and then older levels of the facility. So that's like the part you swim through and the part that you fall into later. They had this very interesting idea to wrap the facility around the innermost area where there's this kind of spherical recluse chamber that you'll see that we went with. That's this thing. And this is the recluse processor. This machine potentially holds the copy of Gaia Aloy seeks, and it's her ultimate goal in the level. But it must also serve a variety of other complex needs that we'll talk about in a little bit. Okay, so here we go. This is the very earliest playable version of the skeleton quest. And I'm going to show you this in its entirety because I think it will give you a lot of helpful context on what changes and what we did as we went. So Aloy enters, she passes through a security checkpoint into a main large central hallway that I was talking about. Her goal is here in the distance, the second gene lock door. Gene lock doors are always really important. They always hold secrets. So we put it at the end of this blocked passage and we say, okay, look, you need to work your way around to it. Aloy works her way around through some side offices. This is a communication center. So here, there's a simple puzzle. We wanted to put in something like a new version of the HoloLock puzzle from the first game, something about restoring power to old world facilities. This is skeletons, so this is just like a simple placeholder of what kind of a rough idea of a puzzle might be. It's not really a puzzle yet. This is what we do with our cinematics early on. They just look like these black title cards that pop up and they describe what happens in the cinematic. They're not flavorful, they don't contain dialogue, they just explain very simply what the cinematic is. And you'll see a lot of those throughout. From there, Aloy begins to work her way down into the facility. Note, there's a little cool side room here with a treasure chest. I was playing a lot of God of War 2016 at the time, so I stuck in a lot of these little closets, essentially, that you could see at a distance, but it took you a little while to work your way back around to them. So you'll see some of those in here. So this is the flooded underwater section, the lab section. We also called it the residential section for a while. In Horizon Forbidden West, we were prototyping and experimenting with swimming underwater. In the first game, you could just swim on the surface of water just like this, but you couldn't dive underneath the water. And so this was a whole new system for this game, and we wanted to highlight it. So in this section, we wanted to play around with the idea of having a tight interior, a space inside where you had to do some underwater swimming that had inspirations like cave diving, essentially. This was an idea that you'll see lots of iterations on as we go through it. So in here, you're also going to see some early versions of the pull caster. So even early on, we had concepts here like pullable chests, which is what that green thing is that you can pull. The point of this area right now is that you're trying to find a valve wheel to install on that kind of gold star-shaped object down there to open this door. I wanted to do something like a lock and key for underwater spaces, and so we were experimenting with that. This pullable chest actually survived all the way through to the finished product, and so when you play Horizon Forbidden West today, you'll see that there's a lot of these pullable chests in the world that you can use your pull caster on. In the early block meshing phase, we put in a lot of these kinds of brightly colored shapes because we don't have the advantage of some things like lighting and VFX that would help guide the player's eye later in development. So we do stuff like this that's a bit blunt to suggest what the player can and can't interact with, like this pullable vent here. This is a simple puzzle where you essentially need to like go into this crawl space vent and then pull from here to get to the other side. Oh no, that's the next version of this. This is the simpler version. So this is the valve wheel. This is the key that you need to find to unlock the locked passageway that you need to get into in the next section. You'll see also that there's this kind of bright purple stripe that runs through this space. That's another tool just to help guide the player and tell them where they need to be going ultimately. This was an experiment in doing a really tight underwater space. We were thinking about doing something like maybe something Tomb Raider-esque where you have these crawl-throughs but with underwater spaces. And that's something that we didn't end up liking very much eventually because it's just a bit too freaky to be swimming through these tight spaces with low oxygen. Players didn't seem to like it very much. So in the next section, we're actually going to be approaching an office space. This is the office of a character named Travis Tate that you might know if you played the first game. So Travis worked in this facility. He was the guy who put together the Recluse processor, which we'll see in a second, and did the testing here. You'll also see as we play through the level that there are some callouts here. Aloy saying stuff like, Aloy comments that you should use a breach charge on this door. That's what we did with early self-talk. This is also a very early version of the Fire Gleam, if you played the finished game. So you'll see that iterate over time as well. So we do this as our early way of stubbing in self-talk. There's a lot of self-talk in our games, and we use that as player guidance tools. We only put the stuff in here that we think is important to contextualize the changing of objectives and understanding for players of what they need to do in the space. So we will add more of this over time, but this is just a simple first pass to try to get across to players who are playing through the level in early testing what's supposed to be happening here. So here to the right, you'll actually see an early view of the Recluse chamber. This idea of having a passage you could pass through and see that inner chamber was something that we tried early on, but we ultimately ended up getting rid of it because it didn't make a lot of sense that this super secure room had like windows that looked in on it. So this is our second gene-locked door. We've gotten back up to the second level. We're ready to go in now and try to find this secret, this copy of Gaia that Aloy's trying to find. So this is the Recluse processor I showed you that concept art of earlier. It's like a giant spider. It's actually a machine that they would use to test like nascent copies of AI against each other, like AI Battle Dome. So you're coming here because this is where they tested early versions of Hades against early versions of Gaia. So that's why there's like a copy of Gaia here that Aloy might be able to find. These were cinematic placeholders early on, but we weren't exactly sure what we wanted to do with them. We wanted to try to do something more like an in-game interactive pseudo sequence. But for the purposes of an early prototype, we just had them in as cinematic placeholders. If you played the finished game, you know that we don't climb on the spider, but I still think this is a pretty cool idea, like something that you'd be climbing around this giant, like moving, rattling thing, this unstable monstrosity that's about to fall through the floor. There was a cutscene there, but I skipped it because it's like big-time spoilers, and I don't want to give you all of that. So what you need to know is we've had some bad guys show up, and we have this bad dude who's chasing you around the space, this guy. He's really powerful, and he has you trapped, so he knows he's going to kill you. So he's like taking his time to stalk you around the space, while Aloy does this thing where she's shooting down weak points on the spider to try to get it to collapse. He just thinks that's stupid. He thinks that's like totally worthless and there's no way she can get out of here. So he's not necessarily trying to stop her so much as just get her and choke her. In this early version, if he got close to you, it was just like instant death. Basically, you would just die and it would restart. We decided that was like a little too hardcore, so we backed off of that. So there was a cinematic there where basically the spider falls and collapses through the floor, and now you're in the swimming section that I was talking about. This is the oldest, deepest part of the facility that's like an old kind of flooded boiler room or generator, basically. We wanted to try, again, some new gameplay here with underwater swimming, where there would be these machines called specters that would be searching for you, this kind of new type of machine. Unfortunately, we had no idea what those things were going to look like, and indeed, we had no idea what they were going to look like for years after this. So what I did instead is I took some humanoid dudes that I had worked with previously with Gatling guns, and I stuck laser beams on their faces. So the idea is you want to get across that they're kind of searching the water for you. I wanted to get across that they were sort of like turrets. So if you swam in the light, they could spot you and then they would shoot at you. In this early version, because this was the earliest version of underwater swimming, they actually can't deal with the fact that you're underwater. They like don't understand what that means. So they can't shoot at you at this early version. So there's a section here after this bit with the polecaster, which is in the finished game as well. This bit survived all the way through to the end. There's going to be this bit where you kind of swim through this section that's a bit of a gauntlet where this guy blows open the roof. You'll see it in a second. But like I said, he doesn't understand what water is, so he's like, what's happening here? So this is something we want to try as well, was underwater crawl vents. See what that was like? Again, like experimenting with swimming in tight spaces. And here's that gauntlet I was talking about. This guy blows open the roof and rakes you with fire, except he's just like, ooh, what's happening? And then here at the end, what you find is like a big crack in the wall, essentially, that you can place another breach charge on, which was our early version of Fire Gleam. It was like a C4 explosive you could stick to the wall and blow stuff up. So detonating that opens a big crack in the wall, and that causes all the water to rush out unexpectedly, and Ailey gets sucked out of the facility. And that's pretty similar to what we actually did in the finished product as well, but you'll see that that changes over time. So that was a lot. That was a lot to digest. That was pretty much the whole early first playthrough, but it's important because it will give you context on how things change later. Okay, just for ease of reference, I want to quickly label some of the areas of the bunker because we'll be talking a lot about each one. So there's the central hallway. That's the area we come into initially and we spot the gene lock door. There's the communication center where we do that kind of little power puzzle I was talking about. There's the swim labs / residential area here that you swim through. There's the recluse chamber, and that's this section here that's where the big spider processor is in the boss battle. And then there's the swim escape, which is this section here where you got to swim for your life out through the end. So, okay, once the skeleton quest is submitted and approved, we now proceed to turn the skeleton quest into what we call a first playable. That's a little bit confusing because what you just saw clearly was playable, but it isn't considered first playable. But what does constitute first playable? It's all about bringing the gameplay up to a representative state. Any gameplay in the skeleton that we explain with text boxes needs to be some actual gameplay with the exception of cinematics. The first playable is the first version of the quest that will start playtesting externally as well, so we start getting some feedback from players. And thinking back on the Skeleton Quest video I just showed you, there were a few areas we really wanted to spend some time developing the representative quality of, which I mean is it just what was there was not like what the finished product would be like, not even close. So we wanted to start with the communication center, for instance, that space where there was that simple little like 3-console puzzle. We didn't feel that that space and the puzzle placeholder inside were representative of what we really wanted to do. We knew we wanted to do a new kind of power puzzle, a follow-up to the multi-like puzzle from the first game, but we didn't quite have a firm idea of what that would be yet. So you'll see some different versions of that. The space itself also kind of had to tell a specific story, and we asked for some help from concept art to achieve this. This room is the one point of communication into and out of the bunker. Because of the dangerous experiments conducted in this facility, no unsecured data could come in or out of this facility except through a secure channel. We wanted to tell that story while at the same time forcing the player to engage with a new type of power puzzle in order to proceed deeper into the bunker. So, here's a video. So, you'll see how this room shape has changed now. It's more this kind of curved shape like you see in the concept art. And we explore a new power puzzle mechanic here. The idea being that there is a connection, like a power cable that runs from this console through to some kind of generator. We also started playing around more here with the polecaster, the pull tool. And you'll see that there's these green blocks in here that you can yoink around the room as a way to reach inaccessible areas. So the idea here was that you need to get up to this thing that's kind of like a generator, and when you get up there, you would do something like a mini game or something like a simple interaction that would start this generator back up and allow you to use the console, which didn't have power downstairs, to start the cinematic that we had as a placeholder before. We also wanted to make some changes to the lower level, the flooded residential lab area, to execute on a specific vision. We had an early idea to try to achieve this unique kind of cave diving feeling that you see a little taste of here in the concept art. Bunkers in Horizon Zero Dawn had this cave-like aesthetic quality, so cave diving as an analog seemed to make a lot of sense to us. We needed to add lighting to get a representative gameplay feel of that, though. Like, without a lighting pass, you would never get that sense of it being a cave, like a dark cave that you were swimming through. And we experimented with an early player-mounted light here as well, like something like a shoulder-mounted light or kind of an omnidirectional light that you would carry around with you to give this space, like, again, like a vibe. And we got help from Viz to get a sense of what the look would be. So here's some early moonboard explorations of the cave diving concept, including some renders that were really inspiring to me. And this piece was kind of my North Star. I tried to achieve this look, this feel through the process of moving this into a representative state. So here's a video of that. So you'll see that we darkened this whole area. We actually got an early pass from the lighting team, and we started experimenting with this player-driven light that was on her wrist. There's also a lot of small particulate stuff that we added to the water in here, and things like floating crates and stuff like this, that again gave us this opportunity to achieve a kind of feel in here. Because this space was really more about trying to achieve this feeling for the player than it was about trying to achieve challenge. We didn't want to make it so dark that it was hard, and we also decided to de-emphasize puzzle solving in here, because to us that wasn't like the biggest, most important part of this. It was trying to achieve this feel. So the next area we wanted to focus on was the Recluse Chamber boss battle. So we added in the first representative spider model. We added the pull caster in as well. We wanted to experiment with trying to use this new tool that we had as a boss mechanic. We cut climbing on the spider in favor of putting in a tutorial moment because we felt it was really important if we were gonna make you use the pull caster in this battle that we had to give you the opportunity outside of a fight to learn that. It's just too stressful having a guy chase you around trying to choke you when you're trying to teach the player new mechanics. And that's why we needed a tutorial moment, essentially. And we moved the weak points to the walls. So the weak points had previously been on the spider, but that was kind of problematic because what happened was players spent all their time and attention looking up and at the center of the arena instead of looking down and at the horizon of the arena, which meant they never really looked at the boss. We also got this piece from concept art, which just like the one I said before was my North Star. This one again was like the vibe for me, right? Like I was trying to achieve this. So here you go. So now we go in and we activate these consoles, same as before. You see this new model of the spider actually animating and moving.
Comments on the explosion and the activation of the spider.
We added this tutorial as I was talking about before. We started referring to this as a nugget, and we'll talk a little bit more about that later, but the idea is to give players a really small, simple version of a complex interaction before you ask them to do it again in a more complex way. It's sort of there to prime their minds. So here's our boss again. As you can see, we've changed him. He's different now, and we've moved the weak points that you need to interact with to the walls. In this version, they are a combo. You have to pull a cover off of them, and then you have to shoot them to break this, this cable. But as you can probably see from this example, from this playtest video, our testers kind of were still able to completely ignore the bad guy. He didn't actually present enough of a threat to them that they felt like they had to pay attention to him. So this was a challenge that we already knew we were going to have to address in another iteration. So just to summarize what happened during the first playable phase, we brought all gameplay up to a more representative quality, not a great quality necessarily, but a more representative one. Possibly with the exception of the swim escape stuff, we'll talk more about that later. We have some new puzzles that we're trying out. We've got a new mood for the swim labs, and we have the first proper animating recluse in, as well as some new boss fight mechanic tweaks. And now we're ready for external playtesting. We're actually ready to show it to players and see what they think. So with the first playable done and approved, we move into the period of iteration and parallel development. So now we're getting regular playtest feedback that informs our decision making. We're now at a level of certainty about the content that we feel comfortable with other departments beginning to commit resources to the level. So we'll start getting in art, we'll start getting in sound, we'll start getting in all kinds of things. So art passes start getting integrated. Core technical design gets involved with the recluse chamber because we needed some help from them to set up this complicated, animating, moving, weak-pointed, interactive object. And I began to work on some other quests in parallel. This was the very first quest I worked on in Forbidden West, but only one of 7 pieces of content I built. So I started working on some other things that helped inform me and give me some ideas that I brought back to this level. So the communication center, what did we change? So I started working on this other quest called Seeds of the Past, which is one of the other main quest chapters I worked on. And early playtesting told us that the puzzles in Death's Door was too simple. There wasn't enough there. In response to that, we played around with adding a new power puzzle mechanic called the Charged Spear that I had been working on in Seeds of the Past. So I want to show you a video of that, of those experiments, basically. So the idea here is that we wanted to give Aloy the ability to hold some electrical charge in some way that she could carry it from like a battery to something that needed power. Here you see again the way that we executed that with a kind of nugget, where I gave the player a really simple example of how to interact with this mechanic in a tight way in the beginning of the level here to open up this office where there's a data point, some chests and stuff. But then when you go in the communication center, you'll see again that, oh, there's another one of these things that I have to put some electrical charge into. The complicating factor here that you'll see is that there's kind of a shallow layer of water down here in the bottom of the floor. We still have the elements here where there's a pullable box that you can manipulate with the pullcaster. You still have to do that to navigate the room. But the deal is, if you put a charge into your spear, and then you come here and then you touch the water in the ground, the electrical charge in your spear will dissipate. But even to set up the kind of traversal you need to do to get through this room, you've got to pull these boxes around first. So here's what happens if you jump in the water. The charge dissipates and you've got to go grab it again. We actually changed this shortly thereafter to actually have deeper water. That's the version you see here. We did that because our creative director played through a version of this puzzle, and he basically said, it doesn't feel heroic enough that if I touch this inch of water in the ground that it defies my efforts, right? It disperses this energy. We need something more dramatic than that. So we decided to try actually swimming depth water here. So art passes start arriving. I receive from environment artists new art files that I need to hook up to the game. The artist doesn't usually do this because it would break playability. So they give me all the art files, and I push that into the level, and then I adjust all the spawn points and the triggers and all the stuff that I've made before, because the art is not going to be exactly the same as the gray box that I provided them. I compare my blockout to the new art because things always shift around. I remove my blockout while doing so to adjust spawned objects in my scripting. And typically, we have 2 art passes, and then we have a lighting pass that comes in. From now on, you'll mostly be seeing arted and sometimes lit spaces. So here's that same area, essentially, that same puzzle, but now we have a basic art pass. No lighting pass yet, but here's first art pass. So you'll see that the blockage here in the hallway has gotten much more dramatic. And we did tweak the design here to actually hide the door to the communication center behind the corner, because we found that in playtesting, a lot of players were getting drawn into this door. You like that little simple waggle interaction on the door? Didn't end up keeping that. But we found that a lot of players were getting sucked into this room first before they would go to see the obstruction, the blockage, and we didn't want that. So for several playtests, the feedback on the swimming parts of the level had been pretty negative, talking about the swim labs. But we really believed in the type of experience we were trying to deliver here, and we felt that it was the swimming system, the kind of broader system that was new, that needed iteration more so than the space needed iteration. At a certain point, the core design team came to us with revised guidelines and metrics for how swimming spaces should be designed. And unfortunately, this was in the middle of ongoing art passes, so we had to rush to make changes. So, the vision is that swimming should not be stressful. It should be chill. It should be fun. It should be like adventuresome. You should avoid bad flows, frustrating fail conditions, and they provided examples from my own content, essentially, because that was the stuff we had to look up at that point. So they would point to things like this and go, you're not giving players enough space to move, you're making things too constrained, it doesn't work out super well. Avoid using hard-edged geometry that stops flows. Avoid placing tricky doorways and openings. So again, this was like my tight swimming area. They didn't like that very much either. Provide clear player direction. Where are they supposed to go? So this was pretty rough feedback to receive, right? Because it felt like, oh my God, I've been trying to do all these things with the swimming section that the core design team is telling me now is like totally antithetical to the design that they're trying to propose. They want everything to be really chill, and I've made everything just a little too stressful. So we took a crack at doing a redesign at the same time that we were getting the art pass, and you'll see that there was a decision made here, actually at the very last minute, to double the depth and double the width of everything. So now this space is much, much larger, as well as being arted and lit. This was a little contentious because we weren't sure that this space made sense anymore. Like, why does a hallway in a lab have like 20-meter high ceilings? That doesn't make a lot of sense, right? But in the context of players playing through this space and swimming through this area, they don't really notice it. They don't question it per se. It's like the same reason why in like classic first-person shooters, bathroom doors are like 12 meters high by like 10 meters wide and stuff, you know? They don't have actual human proportions, and that's the same kind of thing we ran into here. So, moving on to the recluse chamber, boss changes. So the recluse chamber and the corresponding level design also got a big upgrade during the art pass. At this time, the core technical design team also got involved with helping to rig this thing, get it moving and animating. We also tried some new experiments with how the boss fight would work, and I'll talk about that more in a second. As I showed before, this was our initial guiding light piece of concept art. But as we started to build it, we actually found out that we needed to kit bash it together with existing bunker pieces. So we did a big redesign of the spider to actually be done in the style of the bunker, more so in this kind of different, more spiky style. Note the new redesigned recluse during using bunker pieces in this video. So Bo, our environment artist, he actually kit bashed this whole spider together. Pretty amazing stuff. You'll also see that the outer cage of this chamber is this like crazy spherical cage, whereas all the stuff I had before was these like kind of tall linear bars. It was just like so hard to try to mock up something like this with the tools that we had. So when we got the art pass in, it really helped so much. You'll also see here that we've changed the way that these weak points work. They now have a timing element. And the weak points have drifted up in the cage. I didn't love this. We ended up changing it back again, but we moved the weak points up because we wanted to actually put them at natural connection points on the walls. This timing element meant that you couldn't just ignore the boss anymore as easily. You had to pay attention to him a little bit more. So, feedback received on this version of the boss fight. Players never look at the boss, weak points are too high, weak points are too simple, you can easily shoot them all too quickly. It's like the same problem as before. It won't go away. So here's how we tried to fix it. We changed the weak point position back down again. We tried to do pull or shoot, but not both, move away from pull or shoot. During this process, we started to have this like creeping feeling that maybe pull was not the best use here. Like the pull tool, the hook caster, the pull caster was never really designed to be used in combat, and we were kind of trying to shoehorn it in there. And we added this new concept that I thought was really cool of a pulsing shield. So in order to get players forcibly to interact with the boss, what we did here is we had you shoot at him, and when you'd shoot at him, it would overload his shield that made him invulnerable. And when it pulsed, it could damage you, but it would also cause these weak points on the walls to destabilize. So in between shooting or pulling these weak points on the walls, you had to turn to him, fire some arrows at him, get his shield to overcharge, and then that would unlock the weak points for you. Okay, so lastly, I want to talk about the swim escape because we haven't talked about it in a while. We haven't talked much about this section because it stayed pretty basic for a long time. We had no idea that the Spectre machines were going to look like, what size they were, or what behaviors they had. But during this process, we did get some help from concept art. So this was the very first image I got of a Spectre. This is the first time I ever saw what one of these things might actually look like, and I was like shook. I was like, what is this gigantic thing with creepy human hands? At this point, I had no idea how big they were going to be. So I had been using humanoids as a placeholder, so I had to suddenly like double the size of all these walkways and spaces that they could be on because I wasn't expecting them to be this large. Concept art also gave us treatment of this space using my mock-up, so using my gray box, to give you this sense of what this kind of boiler room industrial feeling was. And these images really helped us understand how we could deliver a finished arted version of this. So just to summarize what happened during the iteration and parallel development phase, we tried out multiple new puzzle concepts throughout the bunker. We integrated first art passes. We reworked the swim labs to new metrics provided by core design. We changed much of the recluse spider boss chamber in response to art needs and tried out several new mechanics in the boss fight. We got concept art support to help us move the swim escape section forward. Does anyone know what's coming? So, a time of great change. The last meeting I remember having in our old offices in the canals of Amsterdam was a meeting with my lead and producer. They pulled me into the boardroom to tell me that Matthias, our game director, wanted me to make a pitch for a bold reinvention of this quest, a big change. Shortly thereafter, the heads of the studio reached out to us to let us know we were shifting the entire company to a remote working model in response to the new pandemic. I think you guys know how that went. For the foreseeable future, Guerrilla would be working from home, and my task was to come up with a bold new pitch. So, why did we want to do a rework? Let me talk for a moment about ACE pillars. So ACE was a tool we started using at this time to help us identify shortcomings in the game. So A is for astonishing. We felt collectively like the content in the early part of the bunker wasn't astonishing enough. It didn't equal some of the wow moments we had in bunkers in Zero Dawn. C is for challenge. The puzzles and swim section weren't challenging players enough. We wanted more challenge. E is for engaging. So astonishing, challenging, engaging. Those are the metrics we look at. We weren't making full use of the suite of new tools at Aloy's disposal. We wanted to add new Forbidden West mechanics here, like the shield wing and the grappling hook. Those all came online during development, and so during early designs of this quest, I didn't know they were going to exist, so I didn't put them in the designs. Once we learned that they were going to be a big part of the game, this level had to be redesigned to highlight them because we got those tools right before this quest. So, started by outlining a set of goals informed by the conversations with my lead and director about the direction they wanted it to go. So, provide an astonishing moment shortly after entering the bunker, focus on challenging traversal gameplay through an epic space using grappling, pulling, gliding, give the player a clear sense that they're moving towards a goal, the second gene-locked door, while progressing through the space. And limitations. Shrink the square footage for the purposes of art and lighting. The Zenith, that's our bad guys, must be able to come in through the space when they follow you in. And we want to maintain the communication center and Travis's room as locations the player goes to, and the stuff that happens in them is pretty much the same. So don't cut those, just find a way to reuse them while sticking them together in some new way. So, this was my pitch. I'm not going to read you this whole thing because we got started a little bit late, but let me give you the overview, okay? So just beyond the security checkpoint, the players encounter a vast passage like a tunnel, roughly 100 meters long and 25 meters wide. The passage which once featured a long suspended catwalk. That catwalk is mostly broken now. Luckily, this catwalk branched in a few locations to these rooms, namely the communication center and Travis's office that are still there. And Aloy must weave her way along through the passage using grapple points, pullable IOs, and shield wing glides. So this was my very first paper design of what that could look like. So we come in, security checkpoint, now we're in this big kind of broken passage, and we have to work our way through that broken passage to these rooms that we've maintained. So this was a really early mock-up I did of like what that could look like, right? You come in and you find this massive chamber inside. This is nice because we go from a point of constraint, like a gene lock door, like everything's really tiny and small, and then we get a nice big wide reveal. The response to the proposal from leadership was this. Is this big enough? So I made it bigger. Can the other departments, especially art and lighting, support this change? Well, okay. Concept art supported us to try to find a look for reference so we weren't committing to the idea without knowing what it would look like. It helps our art and lighting department know what they're being asked to make if concept art is there to provide them a guiding light. So concept art was kind enough to come in and give us some renders. So these were the early renders they gave us of what this space could look like. This was a bit informed. Our art director said that he wanted a vibe kind of like, there's a level in Portal 2, kind of has this nice like back of the house industrial feel, and that's what we went for. Here's some other examples. We tried to make use of large repeating structures and features that we could make once and then repeat and repeat and repeat to give the space complexity but not make it harder to build. And as you can see, it has a much bigger and more dramatic sense of scope, scale. So unfortunately, this means that the underwater swim lab sections are cut. Pour one out for the underwater swim labs. I still think that this was a good idea, and in fact, if you've played the game, you know that there's another part of the game where we did this huge interior swimming section with dark lighting and holograms and stuff, and it works really great. It was a good idea, it just wasn't the right time. So let me show you a playable example of this version that I made to show people. So this is our shattered passage. And if you've played the game that's been shipped today, you know that this is the version of the level that we ended up going with. So not too much more of that because we'll see other versions of it. So the response to this rework of the main chamber was really positive. This led to further discussions about what other parts of the bunker could be improved. What would a proposal to change the recluse chamber and that boss fight along the same lines as this shattered passage proposal look like? So again, looking at the ACE parameters, let's think about this. Astonishment. If the battle doesn't focus on the coolest asset in the room, the big spider, it instead focuses me on the walls during this entire fight, so I'm not astonished. Challenge. The challenge is there, but it feels like a struggle to understand what's going on rather than a struggle against this guy, this dude who's trying to choke you. Engagement falls flat as overloading Eric's shield becomes repetitive, and so does the loop of the interaction with the wall points. The fight lacks stages and escalation. Okay, so goals and limitations again. Goals, focus on the spider first and Eric second. That's the boss, Eric. Make the player objectives crystal clear. Destroy the spider, survive Eric. 2 phases of the battle. Spider escalates, Eric escalates. Limitations, minimize changes to the cinematic. Use the Eric design provided by combat as much as possible. Consider fallout on core tech design. The pitch. Rework the weak points in a way that features the spider. So, the idea I had was to cut the strings of the marionette. So we'd have these strings that would suspend all the arms from the ceiling, and there'd be weak points on the strings that you would shoot to cut these strings. Severing the cables causes the spider to swing back and forth, destabilizing the room. This complicates the timing of destroying the coupling weak points. So, escalate the intensity of the boss fight over time with 2 phases. During phase 1, Eric uses ranged projectile attacks to disrupt the player. Cutting all the strings starts a special phase transition sequence. Do you remember what we had in the very first version of this boss fight? A phase transition sequence. And then the spider will drop down, and then we'll have to destroy these trunk cables that connect it to the ceiling. Each weak point is visible from zones on the outer edge of the room, and that's where we shoot them from. Change what triggers the collapse of the recluse. We used to have to run up underneath the spider and use a specific use location because they wanted the player to start the cinematic in a specific spot. But I said, man, that sucks. Can't we just shoot this guy a bunch and then shoot the weak points in the spider, and then that would trigger the cinematic, and we'll cover Aloy being in different parts of the room. So destroying the last trunk cable weak point triggers the collapse cinematic. And I said, let's adjust it like this, okay? We no longer use this console in gameplay, Instead, we transitioned from shooting the final weak point directly to following the cinematic. So I said, let's start here. Let's start on the shot with Eric, and then we reposition Aloy. No one will know the difference. I also want to show you this because it's kind of cool. You see the early mock-up of what this cinematic looked like. And then you'll see a little bit later on what it actually looks like later. Can we really deliver on true physics-driven simulations for the spider's arms and wires? This was a big question mark. We weren't really sure, but we kept working on it. Okay. Here's a video of our first step of rebuilding the Recluse to the new cutting the strings concept. So I want to highlight something right away. So these are the new weak points on the wires, but as you'll see, they're kind of weird and wiggly. In my mind, these strings were going to be taut the whole time. They were going to be pulled from the ceiling vertically, but that doesn't actually make any sense if the spider's supposed to be swinging because it's working against constant tension. So there needed to be slack in the weak points, and that didn't work so well. So Marcin, the designer I was working with this on Cortec, he'd actually built these kind of bracelets on the spider's arms to connect the wires to. And I thought, oh man, well, what if we just tried to make the bracelets the weak points? I think that's actually a better idea. So he hooked those things up as the weak points, and bam, there you go. Here's the new phase transition cinematic. Drawn by one Klaus, who's in the audience today. So this is a cool storyboard moment, and you'll see again how it changes a little bit over time. But this is our phase transition into phase 2 of the boss fight. And it's also nice because the cinematic shows you what you need to do. It works really well with the gameplay. Again, I'm going to keep moving because we got started a little late. Apologies. There was also a desire from direction to tweak the flow of some of the swim escape stuff. So we actually re-paper designed that whole thing as well. So this is the Spectre we actually ended up getting. Pretty cool, right? But this dude is super big. So like I said, I had to go in and redesign a lot of the sections of the level to accommodate the size. And here's a little video that shows you how we redesigned it with the actual Spectres at scale. This was part of the redesign that we put in as well. We added some long sections here, like this section here. We wanted to add a section in the beginning that had you swim underwater just long enough to deplete your oxygen, and that would force you to the surface to see the Spectres. Little trick. We had problems in early playtesting where you had enough oxygen to actually just swim through this whole place and you would never see these dudes. Okay. So, yeah, we redesigned a summary of what happened. We completely reworked the main chamber of the bunker. We cut the swim labs. We reworked the boss fight with new weak points on the spider. And we redesigned the swim escape section with new gameplay segments and a way to accommodate the larger than planned for size of the Spectres. Okay, finishing touches. I got to speed through this, you guys, and I apologize because the next presenter is going to be coming up soon. I think, I'm pretty sure. No? Oh, no? Okay. Well, we'll keep going. Okay, finishing touches. Because of large reworks during the phase before this, we had to do new art integration late in the process. This leads to late lighting as well. Traversal gameplay iteration in response to playtesting. There was tons and tons of traversal in here. Basically, there was grappling, there was big jumps, there was stuff you had to pull down and grapple to, and this presented just like a nightmare in testing because it was this crazy big jungle gym. We did boss battle tweaks in response to playtesting. We built custom servitor behavior scripting to support the swim escape because the servitors, the Spectres, what we found out is they were supposed to be doing stuff like clinging to walls and clinging to ceilings and shooting you from there. And we had no code to actually support doing this. No other machine in the game does this. And we did bug fixing. So, iteration during the finishing touches. Because we completely reworked this section, we had to work hard to catch up on lost time. This caused our score to dip for a while as we lost progress compared to previous level versions. A more traversal-oriented space suffered more from readability issues than previous versions. Small snags in players' ability to move through the space caused huge dips in player scores of the level when we tested it internally. So if we put in a small art change and that made it much harder to jump to a single piece, people's perception of the entire segment would change dramatically. So in less than a year, we went from this to this to this. And every version had huge challenges along the way. So this is just a video example showing some simple stuff that we had to fix along the way and some huge frustrations certain players had. So, for example here, players had forgotten how to jump backwards off pieces of climbing annotation. They just didn't remember how to do it. And then the jump was also kind of awkward and hard to pull off. So what we did is we added these reminders. This is something we took from God of War, these kind of right side of the screen reminders. So this section was really problematic because in so many playtests, players never saw where they needed to go, which was this vent that was up here. They just couldn't see it. They had no idea it was there, man. So one of our designers in core design actually just came up with the idea, like, can we just open it? Can we just open that vent already? No need to pull it open. So that's what we did. In this section coming up, we wanted the players to jump within range of a point that they needed to grapple to. But what we found out was that players hated that. They did not want to do that. They just thought that if they kept sitting here on the edge of the ledge and jumping up and down, eventually the grapple system would let them grapple to that. So what we did is we changed this section to actually give you some self-talk aid, slightly tweak the level design to actually encourage you to move out there.
Don't think my polecaster can latch onto that from here. I'm gonna have to jump.
So. Here's another example where players couldn't remember there was a button they could push to drop down from a ledge. They now knew they could jump backwards, but not that they could drop down.
What's going on here? How am I supposed to get to that? Am I supposed to... Okay. Do you want me to drop down? Jesus Christ. I wouldn't have guessed that. I mean, I guessed it, but...
So what we did here is we added some additional climb points to indicate the value of direction, like to give them a sense that this is the way you need to move. Still have to drop, but we kind of give you a sense that that's the way you need to go. So you can't see it well with the lighting pass, but there's a piece of climbing geometry right here. And I wanted them to move over that way.
So I just want this quest to be over.
And she kept pushing up. She was like, I want to go up. I want to go up. Why can't I go up?
I won't. What do I need to do? Come on. Okay, right there?
Okay, so much for the...
So I was like, okay, look, I'm fine. I'm just gonna put the climbing pieces like right here on top of the pull-enabled grapple point. Okay.
Okay, so much for the flooded maze. I made it.
Okay, let's be realistic. Why is there an obstacle course to get to someone's office? Unrealistic.
This is one of my favorites.
Okay,
People totally
don't
forgot
really
that
care
this
about
stuff
it,
hurts
but
you.
it's a bit unrealistic. Uncool. Uncool.
But I'm a kind level designer, so I put some railing behind you. And we added some dialogue. Okay, so feedback received on the cutting the strings changes. That's the boss battle changes. This tension between needing to split your attention between the recluse and the boss fundamentally works. Players need a lot of help getting hitting the weak points, though. And Eric has to just be the right amount of chill. He can't be too hectic. So we also added this new console activation step to the beginning of the boss fight as well to contextualize why the spider is opening up its weak points.
Access that pod.
Team, don't wait.
So here's like proper Eric. This is like the real boss dude. Also, I have to call out, like, at this point, we had the full support of the combat team coming in and adding mechanics for this guy, which changes the fight so much. When he actually has proper moves and does proper stuff, it really changes the way that this feels. So we added this step where you actually had to go to a console here in the beginning, and by doing that, that's the first time the weak points open up. We also added some pretty heavy arrow magnets to these weak points, so that when they open up, your arrows kind of suck to them as well, so it makes it easier to shoot them when they're open. So this is that phase transition cinematic from earlier, right? Here's the actual thing.
Reckon that thing ain't gonna help, girl.
And there's the thing you gotta shoot.
Come on. Come at me.
Okay. So now we actually had to get the specters working at the end of the level. We needed custom behavior for wall clinging, precise scanning, shooting from walls, and detecting the player. So here's some actual debug test level footage of our specters for the first time clinging to ceilings and clinging to walls and being able to shoot you from there. This was like a huge effort from Tommy Kirsten's over in AI getting it working. Raking fire, that was also a big deal. We wanted them to shoot bullets at you in long raking patterns in the water. And we also want to do this custom searchlight behavior. Like I said in the beginning, I wanted them to be like turrets where they had spotlights that would move around the water. But we had to add custom behavior to do that, where we'd give them an array of points that they would move between looking at with their spotlights. So here's how that all looks in the finished product.
Shit! Might be a way under this.
So, coming to the end, summary of what we did in this last phase. We integrated art and lighting passes for the new bunker design at the last minute. We did tons of iteration on the traversal gameplay based on playtesting. We iterated on the boss fight. We implemented a bunch of new custom AI behavior for the specters in the swim escape. And the feedback we received on the final playtest was higher than it had ever been. So, conclusions. So, how do I summarize 4 years of my life working on something? I started this journey the moment I stepped off the plane from the last time I gave a presentation at GDC. I worked on this quest in parallel with 6 others during the development of Horizon Forbidden West, and that was very hard, but I was able to bring work on those other quests back to this quest and make it better. I've never been asked to change a level design so dramatically, but I've taken smaller changes with less grace in the past. I'm glad I'm better equipped for that now as a designer and as a person. Making this quest was not only challenging, but life too was tremendously challenging during this period for all of us. So, takeaways. Have clarity on the story you're telling. Though this quest changed a lot, the story we were telling remained relatively consistent after the initial documentation phase. We didn't have big story changes. Aim for your early designs to be representative and readable, more so than beautiful or elegant. This will save you both time and heartache. When introducing or reintroducing a complex mechanic or concept, start with a small, easy example. Remember that idea of the nugget. Be aware of when larger designs of the game shift around your level in a way that may require your level to change to accommodate those changes. When tasked to explore big change, make sure you understand the goals and limitations defined by the gatekeepers, and then sell those just as hard as the new idea. And remember, good ideas are like boomerangs. Even when you throw them away, they often come back. So I want to acknowledge the team at Guerrilla. There's no way that I could have made this presentation or that humongous quest without so many people. Please reach out to me on Twitter or shoot me an email. I'm also happy to take questions for as long as they let me. And then when we get kicked out of this room, I'm happy to step outside and take any more questions you may have in the hallway. I'm here for you guys. That's why I'm at the conference. So thank you so much.
Oh, okay, perfect. Thank you again, Blake, for this amazing presentation. I love hearing about the whole design process. It was insane. But if anyone has questions, please raise your hand, and then we'll give you the mic. Oh, there's one. Hold up.
So awesome talk, first of all. How many level designers were working on that, or was it just you?
On that one level?
On that, yeah, on that whole
Just me.
quest. Oh, okay.
Yeah, we have ownership of each quest that we work on, basically. There are some exceptions, like at one point in development, I was working on a main quest chapter, and I just had a bit too much to do. And so at a certain point, I handed that level off to another principal quest designer, and he kind of took it and ran with it through the end of production, because that was just that was what we needed to do to rebalance the workload a little bit. But generally speaking, one person owns the thing from cradle to grave.
Also, all the like blockout changes, also implementing the first art assets, etc. That was all you then.
Well, in as much as my job touches on all those things, of course, I'm not an artist, I didn't make the art, I'm not a writer, I didn't write the dialogue, so I did integrate all those things, and I did work on each new version, especially of like the gray box and the block out. That's all me, I put all those shapes in there. But when the art passes come in, that's guys like Bo and Tomer that I work with environment art.
Awesome, thank you.
All right, any more questions? Oh, here's another one.
Thank you. My question is, I suppose, two parts. Were there, probably from Horizon Zero Dawn, kind of guidelines for the design of the bunkers, especially when it comes to the scale and the ICE kind of tool you were talking about?
Yeah, so to your first question, were there guidelines for the scale of bunkers? We did know coming off of Zero Dawn kind of some things metric-wise about what bunkers looked like, whereas during Zero Dawn, which I worked on all the bunkers in Zero Dawn as well, we really started from nothing. Like, I had no idea how wide a hallway was and how tall a hallway was. Now we use the same metrics from Zero Dawn, like they're like 4 meters wide and 2 meters high or whatever it happens to be. And so we kept those metrics. But as far as like how big the whole thing had to be, it's always with us a measure of what we need to tell the story we're trying to tell and to give the experience we're trying to give. We will sometimes scale down if we have to create a more feasible journey for our partners in art and lighting. But generally speaking, we stick to what is the experience and we make it just as big as it needs to be to give that.
All right, thank you.
What was your second question was about the ACE pillars?
You basically already answered it with the experience of the plays and the other guidelines. Thank you.
And we have only time for one last question. Are you going to give me the choice?
Like I said, I'll step out after this. Feel free to grab me afterward. Or right. At the rest of the conference.
Well, oh well. He's closer.
Yeah, first of all, thanks for the talk. Really insightful. I was wondering, when you say that these general steps are also applicable for smaller teams, and if a smaller team would attempt something like this, what could be left out to make it more manageable?
Yeah, I think that's a good question. Let me think about that for just a second. I think the process is applicable. I think in some ways you can do some of the things I did here a bit faster if you're not necessarily as, given the scale of your project, if you aren't invested in doing so many rounds of player feedback testing. If you don't need to wait a long time for an art asset pipeline that can take quite a long time to deliver what what you need to build the level with in terms of the actual environment art. From the moment where I create a first playable section and it's kind of ready to go, I often am then switching over to work on something else because I have to wait a while until the environment art team and other asset stakeholder teams can come in and do the work that they need to do to then deliver to me for me to integrate. So that's part of why we do work on a lot of things in parallel. But if you're working on a smaller project where you know your assets or you're working with pre-made assets, for example, you don't have to have those long wait times necessarily. You can flow right into buildings. You can even flow right into building stuff with real assets if that's better for your process, right? For our process, we tried at certain phases to use something more like tile-based level design editors, but that just wasn't, it's not us. We like doing really super high fidelity art, and so working everything from block mesh, from BSP, from scratch, so to speak, lets us have the most flexibility in terms of delivering super high level art. That's what we want to do.
Awesome, thanks a lot.
Sure.
And that's all the time we have today. Thank you again, Blake, for...
Thank you so much. Thank you so much.